I bet I know three advocacy tools that you would just love to have. So let's see if I'm right. Would you love a magic wand, abracadabra, boop, and create change that way? Or would you love to have your own crystal ball so you can see exactly what's going to be happening as we're creating change? Well, I'll tell you about the third advocacy tool in a minute. I want to welcome you. I'm Charmaine Tanner. I'm a parent, a retired teacher, and an advocate, and also host of our show, The Art of Advocacy. So today we're going to be talking about moving away from that silo of special education and looking at how we can create change on a more global level so we make systemic change that will affect all students in our schools. So I'm excited because we have a wonderful guest with us today. And before I bring her on, let me see if I can describe what the third advocacy tool is and if you can guess what it is. So some people say this advocacy tool can be sometimes elusive. But if you don't have it, it's like a ship without a rudder. So we want to make sure that we have this deep understanding, and it's almost sometimes intuitive. So can you guess what our third advocacy tool is? And I'll wait a minute for you guys to type in the comments. And I see we have some people with us, and Susan is here. And Susan says, I'd love to be there, but she's on an airplane and she'll have to watch us later. So safe travels, Susan. So, do you know what this third tool is? It's elusive. It can give us pretty deep intuitive knowledge. Any guesses? Well, the third tool that we need are insights. And we are in the right place today because we have with us a person who can give us those insights. So let me bring up our guest using our magic wand, right? Look who appeared! Sue Swenson! And Sue is a parent. She's also been working at the federal level when President Clinton and President Obama were in office. So she definitely has some insights on the federal and political level. But as a parent, she also knows and she has walked that journey with us. So welcome, Sue. I'm so glad you're here with us today.
Thanks so much, Charmaine. I'm very glad to join you and the people who are watching.
So I thought it would be good to have people know a little bit about your story and your son, Charlie, and to see exactly where you started with this journey.
So I can talk about that for hours, and sometimes do. Charlie was born in 1982, in and his disabilities were profound right at the beginning, although it was very difficult to get him labeled. I went to Partners in Policymaking when he was quite young. He was 7 years old in 1989 when I went to Partners, and it really gave me. I'm sure you have people who've gone to Partners among your listeners, and it really gave me that bedrock of understanding what the goals were and how I could work with other people to try to make the change that I knew we would need for Charlie to be able to go to school the same way that his brothers went to school, which is all I really wanted for him at that time. And um, that got me into some advocacy and some even though I was working full time as a marketer for professional services, I started doing a lot of advocacy, and that brought me to DC as a Kennedy Fellow, and then that opened up a door for me to come back in the Clinton administration. So I sort of have one motto, which is when a door opens, go through it. And I didn't plan a career in any way. I just sort of do what it is that people think I should be doing. So that's what I've done. We did have full inclusion for Charlie in school, in a regular Minneapolis school. And I was very involved in all the systemic pieces of advocacy at the special ed committee level at the school, and PTA, the building committee, um, all of these other roles that I got to play, um, partly because of being Charlie's mom and partly because of being Leo and Eric's mom. So I've sort of seen different levels of effectiveness in different places. Charlie died 5 years ago in 2013. He was 30 years old. He had muscular dystrophy among his labels. So 30 was kind of old for a guy with dystrophy, but I miss him every day. And I think about it every day. So
I'm sure. And Sue and I were talking before we came live, and we were talking about people first language and identity first language. And if you want to share with us, Sue, the label that Charlie preferred.
Charlie likes the label person with weirdness. So we couldn't speak, and he didn't have access to typing or anything else, but that's just the one that he laughed the most at. So we thought that was the label that he liked the best. And kind of shocks other people, but I think parents and people with disabilities understand it if I say
that. I bet. Well, one of the insights that I have heard from you before and that I just find really intriguing, and I think would maybe be another great starting point, is looking at that more of that umbrella term of human rights, and under there looking at the civil rights, the political rights, the economic rights, the other kinds of rights. So if you want to talk about that a few minutes, and maybe how a lot of us concentrate on that civil rights part, but there's actually other things that we can be doing too to create change.
So a couple of things. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was first ratified and brought into force 70 years ago this year. It was in 1948. It was after World War II, when there were such despicable things done from man to man that the whole world rose up and said, okay, we have to find something to prevent these things from happening. Some of the people they interviewed and were interested in were parents of people with disabilities, because in Nazi Germany, people with disabilities were, as you know, the first people killed. So we were kind of there right at the beginning of the Universal Declaration. The Universal Declaration specifies civil rights and political rights, social rights and economic rights, and cultural rights. And I think it's interesting. I've done quite a bit of reading about how these work. Civil rights and political rights were the rights that governments tended to focus on in the 18th and early 19th century. So our Constitution is very much about civil rights and political rights. That is the right to sue if you have a problem with government, the right to have your rights protected, the right to get together with other people and work together for change. All of those fall in the civil and political rights realm. Social and economic rights really were more, people were looking at them more at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. So you look at the communist governments coming into play. They were really efforts to try to say, how are we going to distribute the wealth of our whole nation so that everyone has the right to benefit from the economy? And in the US, we had FDR and his New Deal, and we had Social Security come up and Medicaid. We had efforts to try to put in place programs that would guarantee American citizens to also have social and economic rights. They're not in our Constitution. So that's why we have to keep fighting. It's why we're vulnerable on Medicaid, we're vulnerable on Social Security. our Congress can just make up its mind to fund or defund or mess around with everything that we have a right to. I think because our Constitution, our democracy is so mature. We were an early democracy in the 18th and 19th century. I think because of that, we think that civil rights and political rights will protect us. Maybe someday we might need to figure out how to put our social and economic rights in a firmer grounding in the Constitution. Right now, they're mostly grounded in the 14th Amendment, which brings us the Equal Protection Clause. That's where IDEA is grounded, where a lot of the non-discrimination and other rights that we do. Cultural rights, if you interpret it properly, is an umbrella term that can hold all of these rights. So it can hold civil and political and social and economic rights all under it. Because cultural rights, properly interpreted, means each of us has the right to participate in our culture equally with all other people. We have a right to benefit from the advances of our culture. We have the right to, whatever our macro culture is, we have a right to participate. So that's interesting, because what it means is the systems and services that are available to everybody else in our culture to be equally available to us. It should be designed for us. That's really hard for advocates who are going into schools and trying to write an IEP that will make the school serve their child in an inclusive environment. If the whole school isn't designed to be inclusive, very difficult to go in and say, well, I have the civil right as an individual person to be included. So I would urge you to sort of look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and think through what would it mean if our systems were all designed so that everyone had the right to participate. Medicaid too, if you're going to talk about Medicaid, we know there are whole swaths of the American demographic that don't have equal access to waivers and all of the other things that many of us assume are available to us equally. And I don't think we can say that they really are. So that's one interesting distinction to take. I think I'm going to say something really provocative, if you don't mind. I think the disability community is addicted to civil rights and political rights. I think we think that marching in a demonstration or suing somebody is the absolute height of expressing our rights, and that's great. I mean, those are fundamental pieces, but we have to be pushing beyond that. We have to be pushing beyond our right to just complain or demonstrate or file a lawsuit. We have to instead be pushing towards the design that I talked about before, where we have a design that everyone that involves getting past the civil rights thinking. And it's hard to talk about that with the disability community. Because everything we have because of civil rights. So it's hard to say, and we could be doing something else also. But I do think that it needs to be thought about.
Well, and I agree. And I think it's something that doesn't get discussed much in our realms with, parent support groups or, disability organizations. And that's why I thought it would be so critical for you to be one of our guests, because as an advocate, I do go into schools and I do feel like, this is going to change things for one student, but we're not going to get very far if we keep changing our whole system one child at a time. And we have to look, at the bigger picture. I was going to tell people I have this infographic about change that I've used a lot and that I really like. And it talks about the critical kind of components that you need for change. And if you have all of these in place, if you have vision, skills, incentives, resources, and an action plan, you're going to be successful. But what this graphic shows is that when we're missing pieces, it's not going to be successful. So if we're missing the action plan, we're going to have these false starts. If we're missing resources, it's going to be, beyond frustrating, right? If we're missing the incentives for change, we're going to be met with a lot of resistance. If we don't have the skills needed for the people to implement the change, there's going to be a lot of anxiety and kind of turmoil. And of course, if we don't have the vision, there's going to be all kinds of confusion about really what we're doing. So I found this to be really helpful for me when I'm doing work with schools and families. So if you would like to get a copy of that, let me bring up, all you have to do is type the word change in the comments, and then my bot will send you the link for that infographic. But when I was talking to Sue, she says that she has something even more simplified, which sometimes, right, if we keep it simple, it can even be better. So do you want to talk, Sue, about that?
I can't tell you how many times in a meeting I have just written these 4 words, and the way I arrange them is resources goes on the bottom, um, structure goes on the right, power goes on the left, and vision goes on the top. And I think that when I think about it, I really like your infographic. Please send it to me too. I think yours might be a little richer than mine, but I think about the relationships between all of those things. So if you start in an organization saying, oh, we don't have enough resources to do this, typically your structure is wrong. Typically, you don't really have a resource problem, you have a structural. You have to figure out, well, how do we reorganize this so that we can take the resources that we do have and use them to do what we want to do. If you think you have a structural problem, in my model, you better be thinking about your power. Because what power do you actually have to do things differently, to do what needs to be done? So many times I know organizations, especially nonprofits, human service organizations, schools, they write a mission in that box over there, and their mission is so big that they have no chance of ever accomplishing. So they're in that frustration box that you see in your change model all the time because they just don't have the power to do what their mission says they're going to do. But you do have power, and you have to think through what is the power that you do have. So if you're working just in one school, your power is your connection to all of the other families who are in that school. And how can you use that power to begin to look at structure and how it changes? Vision, I think we should all be thinking about vision a lot more than we do. And it's not just someday the world will all buy everybody a Coke and we'll all sing in perfect harmony. And that can't be your vision. Your vision has to be something bigger than that. But I want to read you something from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. If I can just pull it up here for myself. Do you mind?
Oh, that would be great. And then if you can share that link with me, or I could probably Google it, that would be a great another resource we can give people.
Yeah. It's profound, I think, and because what it says in the preamble is, whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. See, I think when we're working on inclusion in school, the vision that we're working on is actually freedom, justice, and peace in the world. It's bigger than we usually give ourselves credit for. And then the first article of the Universal Declaration says all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in the spirit of brotherhood. That's profound, and it is it's something that we want all children to learn when they're in school, right? It's not the curriculum of here's your history lesson and here's your math lesson and here's your English. But to become an educated person means to begin to have dignity yourself, recognize your own dignity, recognize the dignity and the rights of other people. And I don't see how we can do that without inclusion. I just don't see a pathway to raising American children to have a fundamental understanding of human rights if children with disabilities are not included in their learning environments. I think we bear the risk, as they did in the 1930s in Germany, we bear the risk of educating a whole generation of children without a moral compass. So my reason for inclusion was always, yes, I want Charlie to be included because it's good for Charlie. I also knew it was good for me. It was good for Charlie's brothers. And it was also good for all of the other children in the school. And I think that moves you to a vision of what you're trying to accomplish. It is actually powerful enough to fuel. When you wake up in the middle of the night, you might as well wake up thinking about freedom, justice, and peace in the world, as far as I'm concerned. Not how do I get this person to do this thing that I want them to do. So
Right.
The thing I like about my little 4-part model is it starts in the clouds and it goes all the way down to the dirt of the money. And I think that's the way we have to start looking at these models, is thinking about not just how do we linear fashion move towards something that we want to change, but how do we put in place processes where when people think about change, they think about how do I consult the whole community. We should be able to model that so that later when they want to change something, they'll consult us.
Well, yeah, and Jim is asking if you can repeat as far as the vision on the top, the resources on the bottom, and then so if you can just repeat.
I wrote a little PowerPoint for this, and then I realized that it's powerless and pointless. But I will send it to you so that you can have the notes. But,
Oh, good.
So if you think you have a problem with resources, and this actually comes from a philosopher named Richard McKeon, McKeon, who was at the University of Chicago, and I studied with him. He doesn't lay it out neatly in any place, but it's where I got the idea from. So resources first, that includes human resources, it includes unpaid resources, it includes all the children are resources in inclusion. It includes the other parents, they are resources. You can think about all of this as a resource. And it's not just the funding of the school, but it's all of the human resources that you have also. And then secondly, you move to thinking about structure. So how is the school structured, or the school system structured, to distribute those resources or to take advantage of those resources? Some schools are structured to keep the human contact and human discussion completely out of the picture. They don't want it, right? And some schools are structured to bring everyone in and have everyone have open discussions and move forward. We funded, when I was in Obama, we funded the Swift School project, which I really loved, because what it did more than anything was help schools figure out how to have those conversations about what are the resources that we have in special ed, in Title I, in English language learners, and how can those resources be brought together and planned in a different structure so that they reach the needs of all children, rather than staying in those little silos of, oh, here's special ed money, that's just for kids who have an IEP, here's English language learner money that only belongs in this. And Swift really, I thought, had a brilliant proposal and a brilliant idea of how to begin to put in place in schools the skills that were needed to really address all of those things and to bring the communities in, so to build the trust that people need to make those decisions. So then if you figure out you have a structural problem, you need to think about power. And this is the place in a strategic plan where most people will write the word mission. And what I'm saying is, I think mission is really dangerous. I think people bite off more than they can chew, and they forget that their power is limited. And sometimes they don't even make use of the power that they do have. So what what would it take to do a real analysis of the power that's available within your community? Do you have power of connection to other people? Do you have the power of connection to decision makers? Do you have a newspaper that you can use that would expand your power? And using social media to drive your power beyond whatever small confines you might have. Really think through, what do we have the power to do? And my point is, you have the power to include children with disabilities in a dignified and equal way in school. That power changes education for all children in a positive way by helping them understand the complexities of human life. If you're doing that, then you're really reaching the vision of trying to create freedom, justice, and peace in the world. That's a more enticing and interesting and something that people will really commit to on a much deeper level than they will just commit to, well, we want to make sure that the kids who have IEPs graduate with work skills that they can use in the working. That's a good goal. I'm not saying it's not a good goal, but it's not an overall vision that is really attractive and drives other people. Daniel Burnham is the man who built the lakefront of Chicago, that beautiful park with all of the access to the lake, and it's what makes Chicago such a beautiful city. Everyone in the city has equal access to the waterfront, and that's not true in most cities. And what he said is, make no little plans that have not the power to move men's souls. That's what I'm trying to get at here. When you talk about your vision, talk about it in big enough ways. This is what you really want to accomplish it. And so that parents of kids without disabilities can see, well, what is the value to me of inclusion? Because they have to be included too. Kids without disabilities have to be included. And kids who are, quote, gifted, whatever that is, have to be included. And parents of those people and teachers who are nervous have to be included. Teachers who are veterans and haven't done anything new for 20 years, they have to be included if we're going to make real inclusion. And so that's a pretty big vision. To think about, how do we bring all of these people in? They all have power to contribute, and talking to them helps you move that forward. I hope that makes sense.
Oh, it does. It does.
Sue.Swenson@gmail.com. If anybody wants to engage in anything on this, I'll send you everything I've ever thought about it if you want.
Oh, good. Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, because I know people would love to be able to kind of dive into this deeper, and then those are resources that they can share with other families and other stakeholders, because I totally agree with you that I think so many times as parents, we kind of get into our own silos. And so one of the things that I always encourage families to do is, don't make this special PTO organization. Go with the culture of what's there in your school and embed that change in there. Like, I think about, like at the elementary school where I taught, we always had a book fair a couple times a year. And so if parents of kids with disabilities can serve on that PTO and that book fair committee, some of the things that they can bring up are, is this going to be accessible with how we have, the shelves arranged? Are we going to have, a variety of reading levels and, just kind of different thoughts? And that's how we can embed things, because when we keep ourselves as this separate parent silo, then we're a special interest group, and we I think that diminishes our power. And so we do need to open up that circle of allies and think, beyond that school community, like you said, to look at other people in your community and how they can also be connecting and helping push that change.
When I was in my MBA program, we learned to draw sociograms. And I have done this frequently in my life. So you start out not just with the solid line reporting structures of everyone, then you draw the dotted lines. Who do they know? Who do they hang out with? What church do they go to? Who are their friends? These are sometimes where the real connections come from, not the solid, oh, this is my boss and these are my subordinates. So I couldn't agree with you more, Charmaine. I think building a larger tent is the first piece. Now, this seems really difficult. If you have a kid with a disability, you want them to have good education next year because you don't want their developmental period to go by. I found, for me, the fastest change I ever made was cultural.
Say that again. Your mic is cutting out a little bit. The fastest change.
The fastest change I could ever make was cultural change.
Oh, okay.
In Charlie's school, I fought and fought and fought for him to get from the segregated preschool to a smaller segregated preschool that was closer to our house, to a segregated kindergarten. Then he was in a segregated classroom in the same school where my other sons went to school, which is 2 blocks from our house. It took me 4 years to get him there. So he was in 2nd grade by the time he got there, but he was in the segregated classroom. And I just went to the teacher of my older son's 2nd grade and said, hey, Joan, you have story time after lunch, and Will used to really like it. Could Charlie come just for those few minutes while you're doing story time after lunch? And Joan was in one of her last years of teaching, veteran teacher, and she said, sure, absolutely. Send him down. We'll bring him down. He's right down the hall from us. We'll bring him in for story time, and then we'll send him back after story time is over. I said, great. 2 weeks later, she called me up and said, Sue, I need a favor. And I thought she was going to say, he can't stay for story time because he just makes too much noise or has too much autism or whatever. She said, the kids don't want him to go back to that little room. They think it's sad. They want him to stay with us all afternoon. Would that be okay with you? And some of you have probably heard me tell this story before. I said, Joan, is a special favor to you. He can stay all afternoon. Right? And then I started a rumor in the school that you could always tell the best teachers, they were the ones who could handle the kids with disabilities. They were the ones who knew how to individualize, differentiate instruction. And, MBA marketing started this rumor. She calls me up 2 weeks later and says, the kids said they think he would like science. And we do science in the morning. So if it's okay with you, we'd like to keep Charlie in 2nd grade all year long. I said, great, done, you got him. Bye. He had a wonderful year. She said it was her best year. And she was then the model. She was a powerful teacher in the school. Other teachers wanted to be like her. And we began to build this whole system around her. The next year, we had so many requests for inclusive classrooms because of the rumor. We had to break up the whole special ed room just to create inclusive classrooms for everybody else, because the kids without disabilities wanted inclusive classrooms. And they were right. Our test scores went up for the whole school. And so then we began to be a model for Minneapolis. We invited, because the principal was a wonderful man who got a local Chinese restaurant to donate supper. We had one night a month where we invited anyone in Minneapolis who was interested in inclusion come and have supper with us, and we would just chat. And, a very short program, and then lots of ability to just talk over supper. And that was so much more powerful than anything I could have done with insisting on my civil rights under the IEP. So I think that's where real inclusion comes from. I have to say, after I was gone, it lasted for a while, and we got an elevator put in the building, other key things to make the program inclusive. But when the teachers who were part of that changed, and they all started to retire some years later, I think it kind of went away. So keeping things in place is sometimes just as hard as making them happen in the first place.
Oh, it is. It
Yeah.
is. I mean, that trail grows over pretty fast. And that's the part that can be really frustrating when you do have, a change of personnel or staff or, but yeah, I think, we do need to look beyond just like, well, this is what the federal regs say, and this is what my kid deserves, because there's this culture change is going to have a deeper effect. And like you said, it benefits all of the students. The other parents see that. And I always think it's a good idea to think of inclusion with a marketer's hat on. I'm not sure what that hat would be, but because yeah, so I guess we need the magic wand when we do this, right? But because I look at the different people in the different groups of people, and we need to appeal to them with different information, and not thinking that, if we have this one research article we're going to share with the staff, that's going to change things. And just like our kids need to learn in different ways, the adults need to learn in different ways. So having podcasts to share with people, or having your change with your 4 different parts to it, those kinds of visuals can be important. And when we speak at school board meetings, we need to appeal to what's in it for them, which is going to be different than when we talk to the principal or the teachers and they want to know what's in it for them. So I think your marketing background probably is such a cool asset.
Well, one of the things I think to think about when they ask, well, what's in it for me, you ask, what do you have to contribute? Because I think one of the things I've learned is people don't like to work in a compliance environment. If all they have to do is follow the rules, it's just icky. It's not, doesn't bring their best ideas out. It doesn't encourage them in any way. If you ask them, well, here's the kind of environment we're trying to create, and we know that you all have gifts, and what do you think your particular contribution to this could be? How could you help us make this happen? I think you get a lot farther and create the kind of workplace where people want to be, where their strengths are recognized, and they can really contribute. And then you get to do what is called lead by thanking. You get to turn to them and say, we are so grateful for the way you've helped create this environment in this 3rd grade class where children can all collaborate with each other and help each other. And it's been a profound change, and we're grateful. So, and leading by thanking is also not part of the compliance model. Nobody thanks anybody for following the rules. That's just like, it's too icky to think about. So I know it sounds like I'm totally, I did administer IDEA for 7.5 years, but I do think it's a waste of time to think of it only as a compliance system. I think you must think instead, how do we get beyond compliance? What is the real sense of an education that would bolster my son or daughter's sense of themselves as a person with a disability who has dignity, and someone who you don't have to, it's not in spite of your disability that you're included. You're included with your disability, and the disability is up in front. And you still have dignity, and you still belong, you still are part of the community. I think that's what we really do want for our kids. And it's not easy.
Wow, it is. And it's like what they say, right? It isn't easy, but it's going to be worth it. And I know another thing that you talk about is parent leadership. And so I look at, if we look at the four kind of components that you had talked about, not all of us are going to be great leaders in each one of those areas. And so if that's why we need this wider circle of allies, because we can tap into parts of it that are going to fit with our personality, our kind of motivation. And I look at, I'm sure Michael Remus from Deer Valley School District in Arizona. And when I've heard Michael speak before, he talks about, when he first goes to school districts, one of the things that he does is he really looks at the resources that are already there in the district. And he concentrates first on the personnel and looking at how else we can use those people versus this is my title, this is my room, this is where I belong. But no, it's if we go with that vision, if we expand what we want our culture to be in our school, how can we kind of reassign the roles of our staff so we can start achieving that culture change?
And that's so important. And it's important. If you're going to set out to change the world, for God's sake, don't do it alone, because it's not going to work. I hate to tell you. Don't substitute compliance with your rules and your orderly understanding. Don't substitute that for the compliance model of the IDEA. You can't just boss people around to make this stuff happen. Alas, if that were possible, that would have been something. But you got to work with other people. You got to recognize that this sounds paradoxical, but a resource is that everybody is lonely. I mean, everybody in the United States is lonely. Even those of us who are up to our eyeballs with taking care of a son or daughter who requires around-the-clock supervision or lots of interaction. Yes, we're exhausted, but we're also lonely. Teachers are lonely. Other parents are lonely. Americans in general are lonely. We have social media, but that's a surface that will begin to connect us to other people. If we don't dig down into it, we can't really make it really social. So, for example, the most successful, massive, open online courses, MOOCs, are the ones that not only do they do online teaching of all this stuff, but they help people connect at a local level so that students can go have coffee with each other and talk about class and see what they want to learn. We need to do a lot more of that. And just the simple support of inviting a couple of people over for coffee at your house. And you have to get past, oh, my house is dirty or it's not fancy, or don't invite people who care about that. Invite people who don't care about that. Invite people who just want to sit with you. And otherwise, go meet them at Starbucks or find some way to connect with people. Because I had friends, there were four of us. We all had kids with disabilities. We were all partners grads. We walked around Lake Harriet every Saturday morning in Minneapolis. The whole time our kids were growing up, and until I went away to be a Kennedy Fellow, I would have seen, I used to walk those 20 below, and we all looked like four Michelin men walking around the lake. Because it really mattered to have that connection. We didn't agree on everything, and we weren't all working on the same stuff, but we had a connection with people that we liked and respected. That it sounds silly to say, well, if you want to change the world, make friends, but you should do that. And you should make friends with some other people who are maybe a little different.
Well,
for your sake, as well as for their sake.
I know. We have a comment from Alicia. She says, as a parent leader, I always talk about progression planning in parents' volunteer roles, so younger parents continue to carry and grow the message.
That's really brilliant, and I wish I had thought about that when Charlie's school was so beautifully inclusive, and trying to think about ways to carry that forward. I think that's an enormous contribution. It makes me think about.
Yeah, and Jen says a place where strengths are recognized. Yes, who doesn't want that?
Exactly. And in our schools and with our IEPs, sometimes we're just focusing on deficits, aren't we? Not just our kids, but also ours and the teachers.
Oh, I know, and that's the thing. If I think how everything is, I don't know, set up now as far as from the federal level and the monitoring that they do for states and the states feeling this pressure that they have to, meet these compliance goals. And I know that OSEP has been talking, in the past few years about changing that to outcomes and not just compliance. But I just still see so many districts where if they can check off the boxes, they feel like they've done their job. And that's where I think this conversation about culture change is so critical, because we're not here advocating checking off boxes. We're looking at that big vision we have for our child and all the kids as far as what rich future they're going to have. And yes, academic skills are important, but you also look at basic things like relationships and just that. Go ahead.
Self-concept. I mean,
Yeah.
all of those things. I think that's right, Charmaine. Yep.
Yeah. So
To me, working with Inclusion International, that I have learned, and I learned as I progressed from Minneapolis to the state of Minnesota and then to the feds. Everybody thinks the problems are local. They think it's their school or their school district or their state, or sometimes, oh, it's our country and our laws. And now working internationally, I don't know anybody around the world who isn't struggling with exactly these same topics. How do we make the school truly inclusive? And I think we can do it. I don't think we can depend on IDEA to do it. I think we have to do other stuff to help us get there, but that's the beyond compliance. Um, and I think the goal should be to make sure that IDEA is not in the way. Make sure that compliance does not stop real progress and real good ideas happening. When they first passed the Education for All Handicapped Children Act in 1975, there were two goals. One, make sure that all children with disabilities would have a free, appropriate public education. Two, make sure that all other children would learn that disability is a natural part of the human experience. Now, that is an embedded culture change. That was a vision for what America would be, where we would all recognize the goals of the ADA and the way that the ADA works. We would recognize the rights of our fellow citizens. They built that in 1975, but frankly, I don't see where we're doing that anywhere in the law, where we're really trying to focus on that. The other thing is empathy for other people. I'm sometimes in a place where I just get on my high horse and I want to say, well, no one should have the right to sign their child up for a segregated classroom. Placement is discussed and it's segregation. I don't see why a kid with a disability should have access to a segregated setting. You can't request one because of race or gender or anything else. Why should you be able to request segregation? Sometimes I think that's right. And then I get angry that so many parents do sign and approve an IEP with a segregated placement. And I realize that that's my own empathy that's at fault there. I have to really think through what would make a parent do that? What has backed them into a corner where they feel that that's their best option? And how do we reach out to those parents, the ones who are afraid of their status within the community, or they're afraid that their child won't get what he needs when he's in a regular classroom, that it will only be delivered if they're compliant and they go along with the segregated classroom. that requires a different level of empathy from a leader, a different way of reaching out and thinking through how are we going to reach out to all of these. Make sure that nobody is signing on that dotted line. Either that or Olmstead has to turn its face to schools. And we have to have the same rule for schools that we have for institutions for people with disabilities. We need to be able to say, yeah, you can have a segregated school, and the parent has the right to choose it if it's among the options, but you don't have to have a segregated. And you're not allowed to keep pushing people in there just to keep that model open. That's what they say about institutions. And sometimes I think we should have that same kind of look-see from the Olmstead ADA point of view on segregated schools.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I guess one of the things that I wonder about, so I'd love to get your thinking on this is, and I don't know, but is it like more effective to create systemic change if we work at that grassroots level, where we're looking at changing the culture of our school, and then we take it to the district level, and then we take it to the state level? I don't know. Or do we do all of these things kind of simultaneously? And I don't know as far as what research says about how we go about this, like, like the nuts and bolts of this.
I think you just designed a change process that has not yet been tried in the world, and that I believe would probably be very successful, which would be take advantage of social media to connect you to people who are doing the same things all across the United States, but act local. Act in your school building or your classroom or wherever you can get a start, your preschool, whatever place you have where you can bring together a few other actual human beings with faces and connect to them and work on this stuff, but then find some way to build the infrastructure so that you could be connected to other people around the United States, or frankly, through Inclusion International around the world, who are working on these same things. It is amazing to see how comforting it is to recognize that nobody else has this figured out. It's not like you're the only one whose school sucks. It's these things are difficult, and they're difficult for reasons. And finding connections to people around the other parts of the world who can say, well, here's what we're dealing with, and here's why it's hard for us. I think it's been really important to me. Really, not that I want to admire the problem, but I do want to admire the courage that people have to try to make these changes. You can't just sit back and relax and float around in the pool and depend on IDEA to bring the best stuff to you. You really do have to get in there and work with the PTA or work with other communities that are into whatever music program they have or books or whatever else is going on. Become organic in the school. That's important. But the idea, I think, Charmaine, that you just expressed of connecting that then people who are doing it in other places, I think that's profound. I think that could be very, very helpful.
And I mean, we do have the benefit of things like social media, and I know there are some Facebook groups that are looking at, bringing in a variety of stakeholders and looking at and really not only making those connections on a human level, but like you said, learning from each other and saying, when we had 6 people go to the school board meeting, it was a lot more effective than when we had one person. when we had disabled students talk to the school board meeting, guess what? The media picked up on it. We got a lot more encouragement, and we started seeing other people asking, "What can I do?" So
Right.
yeah, I think it does come back to that human level, and those principles of justice for all and freedom and peace. And those are, that's what our vision needs to be based on, not, how many state standards is this child going to reach before they graduate high school?
Or how many minutes of OT can I get for them every week?
Right, right. You know,
Um,
go ahead.
I think in Inclusion International, we've struggled with this stuff, and we try to take our leadership from people with disabilities. We represent children with disabilities and families all over the world, but then we also represent adults with intellectual disabilities and their families, because their families play significant roles in supporting them, typically for a lifetime. And those folks, we just had our World Congress in Birmingham, England, in June, and the self-advocates told us they demand to be included as a part of the communities. They want to be out in front. We need to put people with disabilities out in front. This is the magic of being a parent, is figuring out that point where, okay, from now on, and Charlie was always at his IEPs, starting when he was 7, because there was stuff they wouldn't say in front of him. Even if they knew he couldn't speak, they still wouldn't say some really disgusting things in front of him. And they liked him, and they wanted to see what it turned him on. But at a certain point, whenever I testified anywhere, I also brought him. So we testified as a pair. And you're right, it is profound when the people with the disabilities are in front and the parent is in the support role behind. And with transition, we really need to be thinking about it. And we need to be thinking about how do we partner with adults with disabilities who can help us by talking about, well, here's what my experience was like in school and why it was a problem. So I think there's partnerships that we can make, not just with other people who are like us, but with the whole disability community. So the people with disabilities told us they needed not only to be included, but they wanted to be valued. And that meant they had to have jobs, and they had to have housing in the community, and they had to have all boys and girls going to school equally and being included. That's a problem worldwide. We have some places where a boy with a disability might have a right to go to school, but a girl is without home. And those are things we have to work on that aren't true here in the US, but I think we could work on gender differences. We certainly know there are race and gender differences in how children are treated or how they are expelled or how they are secluded. So, and then they also wanted us to work on all institutions being closed. And their definition was an institution is any place where the person's opinions don't matter. And I thought, well, that could be some schools, it could be some families.
Mm.
And none of us wants to be that family, but I've been on that edge where I thought if I could get through the next 5 minutes, I would be lucky. Um, and thinking of ways to give Charlie more options and more choices wasn't always right where it needed to be. Struggled with having other people around you to help with your own weaknesses.
Oh, exactly. And going back to what you were saying with the Olmstead decision, Kristen's in Ohio, and she says, how can we get Olmstead, that act, to affect schools?
Well, so piece of good news, the Justice Department, their decision in the Rhode Island transition programs and segregated sheltered workshops was about Olmstead, and it reached into the schools. So if we look at that, I think it would be important. There are some key people. If you send me emails, I will connect you to some people. I'm not comfortable giving their email out without asking them
Right.
online. But send me an email and I can connect you to some lawyers who I think might be interested in it.
Well, and that would be super. And Jen is saying, which is just a fabulous idea, about the opportunity to bring people together by hosting a screening of the new film Intelligent Lives. And that's going to be available for communities this fall. And that's a perfect opportunity to not just bring people, that are parents of disabled children, but to reach out to your friends and neighbors and to talk about this, and maybe have a group screening, and then you go out afterwards for some libations and talk about it. But I think Dan Habib's new film, that Intelligent Lives, would be a great starting point for some community activism.
I think that's a great idea. And there's also Deej, the movie made by the young man with autism who went to college and graduated from college and is non-speaking. And that's a powerful movie too. Habib's movie, I haven't seen the whole thing yet. I've seen pieces of it.
Right.
Even if I watch a piece of it, I cry. So I think it's a very powerful movie. And he has made it available for screenings. So I think that's a great suggestion.
Yeah, I think so too. Well, we're at the top of the hour. I am, as always, I think we could just, like you said at the beginning, talk about this for hours. You have given us some great ideas to spark and have some things percolating within each of our minds. So I'm thrilled about that. You are very gracious in that you have said that if people want to email you, that you will get them in touch with some other resources. I want to remind people that if they would like that change infographic that I showed earlier, just type the word change in the comment box and we'll get that over to you. But I just thank you, Sue, for being there for all of us. You, and it's almost like I think of kind of like, I don't know, like the Native American culture, as far as, learning from each other in those oral stories, and how we can keep the energy going. And I see you as one of those people that we can continue to learn from. So I'm indebted that you could carve out some of your time and be with us. And I know all of our viewers are also so grateful that you were here with us today.
I'm very grateful for the time, and I hope you guys will look up Inclusion International. And if you just Google it, find us, and maybe you want to join. Thanks.
Yes, definitely. And I think when we're looking at change, starting from an international viewpoint can help us, and that gives us more stories that we can share and more connections that we can make. And that's how systemic change is going to evolve, right? So thank you so much again. I want to remind our viewers that we are here every Thursday at noon Mountain Time. Next week, we're going to be talking about how to create different kinds of options, because so many times when we're problem solving, I think we get such a narrow focus. And so next week, I want to talk about how we can expand that and look at all the possibilities that exist for our kids. So until next Thursday, I'm Charmaine Tanner, and we shall see you then. Take care.